Most people spend 4 years at Ashoka University trying to survive it. He finished at the very top, the highest honor in the class. And instead of chasing a salary, he walked straight into the jungle.
Are we going to ask for a world that is equitable to all, especially creatures that don't look like us, or are we going to sit back and watch these spaces get cannibalized? My generation grows up with a lot of climate anxiety.
So you're not telling the people out there to care about what you're caring, but you're showing them what they already have at stake.
China is right now leading the race.
Climate change.
Climate change.
Climate change is making heat waves even more intense.
Shashi Tharoor read your book. He called it blazingly honest. How do you actually change the story that people have believed for decades?
I'm going to give you my polished answer and then I'm going to give you my Indian answer.
Why do you think some people take that first step while the others are still waiting?
Open the hostel door and run into the forest.
And you were not writing to prove something, you were writing to share something, right?
Books don't become a bestseller, especially for a debut author, overnight.
So, like in many Indian homes, talents don't die. They're just promoted to time pass.
That's the Indian story, right? Control yourself, behave yourself.
When you were out there alone in the forest, far from everything and everyone,
Yeah, I remember crying on that mountainside, just feeling this incredible sense of hope.
you wrote a book of your own life, of your own journey at 21. A life most people your age haven't even seen from a distance.
I find myself with that emotion every day.
I believe that stories shape the world.
So as a 19-year-old, I could say that I had followed a king cobra into the forest, and I had spent time alone with a king cobra, much like this.
You've seen the teaser, you know he's coming. But let me tell you something the teaser didn't say. Most people spend 4 years at Ashoka University trying to survive it. He finished at the very top, the highest honor in the class. And instead of chasing a salary, he walked straight into the jungle. He wrote a book, and Shashi Tharoor called it blazingly honest. It hit #1 on Amazon, not in one category, but four. He's 23 years old and is already spoken at the Kerala Literature Festival, Bangalore Literature Festival, Nature in Focus, stages that most people spend decades trying to reach. His name is Ishan Shanavas, and this is built on values. Ishan, I'm really glad you're here today. I have to start with something I think a lot of people will relate to because most of us at 23 are still figuring it out. And you have already written a best-selling book. You've stood on TEDx stages twice and you've walked around the forest. You've built a movement. When did you actually realize that this is it?
I'm very lucky to say that the natural world has been a part of my life for as long as I can remember. I think that it was less of one defining moment and more a series of small confirmations. So growing up, I was exposed to the natural world very early on by my parents. We used to drive from Bangalore to Calicut, and that drive took us through Bandiko Tiger Reserve, like you were talking about before, yes, recording. And that drive, where I would stick my head out of the window and just look at all the trees passing by and all the deer that would graze beside the road and the occasional elephant that sometimes came beside the road. Those sights deeply affected my childhood brain. Growing up, I wasn't allowed, or at least it wasn't encouraged to watch cartoons and so on. And so I took to National Geographic, Animal Planet. Now, cable television has been trending downwards, but back then it was all the rage. I'm sure you guys remember.
Yes, I
15 years or so ago. And so I used to watch these shows, and my childhood brain couldn't process the fact that these bizarre creatures actually existed on our planet. Creatures that looked far beyond any science fiction that I'd ever read up until that point. Just the fact that there were creatures that looked like tigers, but they were yellow lions that instead of roaming India, of course, there's a small population in India, but there are lions roaming the African wilderness, hunting buffalo and giraffes and so on, or jaguars that are like leopards but bigger and stockier, roaming the Amazon wetlands. Just the fact that all these creatures existed was too much for me to comprehend, and I think that set me on this journey, championing the natural world in whatever way I can.
Nice. That says a lot about your upbringing as well. But did this path actually cost you something? Did you have to give up something to be here?
I think by virtue of this being a little unorthodox, you do take on a bigger spotlight. A lot of people look at you and say, okay, this guy is up to something different. Now, sometimes that's a good thing that people say, oh, look at him doing something unique. But that also manifests in people saying, this guy is really weird. Or this guy is doesn't have his head screwed on that. I have had a lot of people look at what I do and they see it as a passing phase. But the truth is, the natural world, the environment is a fundamental part of who I am. It's not something that is coming and going. It's integral to the person that I've become, and it is integral to what I've built up to now, and it will play a part in the future. That I can say for certain. So you do take on this almost additional responsibility to prove the critics wrong, and you also take on this additional glare. But I've grown to embrace it.
That's very deep, Ishan, because when I was 23 years old, I had just one goal: clear my UPSC exams, serve the nation. Period. We were brought up in that manner, because back then, like 10 to 12 years back, we weren't chasing a calling, we were chasing clarity. So, with that, I want to take you to your family for a second. Ishan, because this is where most people struggle in private. Was there a moment when somebody at home looked at you and said, "This is what you want to do? Like, are you sure about what we're doing?" Take me into that conversation, please.
Well, I've been very fortunate to have a supportive family around me. These are people who are unorthodox themselves. I'm talking about my parents. And so I guess it wasn't surprising that their son was interested in unorthodox things. My dad, for example, was an entrepreneur. My mom was part of that company. And both of them also had this deep interest in the natural world. I think it in some ways permeated from them. So while they aren't fanatics like I am, they would spend the free time that they had exploring natural spaces. And when I was born, I just happened to tag along. And so now, in a way, I've taken up that mantle and I've taken that interest further. And now it's me who's leading them into all these wild spaces. So it's a lucky privilege to be able to say that my family has been supported. Now, I have had those questions come from well-meaning teachers, well-meaning parents of my friends, and well-meaning peers of mine at school. And I've been, by having to listen to all these questions again and again, I've developed a thick skin and I've also developed a deeper conviction in who I am. I think a lot of us, especially in India, you just mentioned that you had to write the UPSC exam. In India, there's the whole hate prophecy of writing that exam or either doing engineering or medicine. That's the stereotype that goes around. And to large effect, it is true. The market of India, uh, that's their aspirations. And a lot of this is forced down their throats. And so I'm lucky to say that I've been born in an environment where that wasn't the case. And that allowed me to explore this aspect of myself. And it's made me a better human being and it's enriched my life that much.
That's not something that everybody gets to hear, especially from the family, because like I mentioned earlier, my path was actually fixed. Pursue engineering, do your master's, uh, then get into UPSC, serve the nation, period. I mean, like that was it. Like we didn't have the scope to, like think for ourselves. So what, like how you have done and like how you've come up, I think that's something to look up to for all the young generations out there.
Appreciate that.
Yeah. Like I come from a family that had imagined a version of me. Like my parents, since I am from an academic background, my parents had that thought that, okay, I want my son to be an IAS officer. I want my son to be an IPS officer. I'm pretty sure you've seen that too. Has anybody at your house, like, ever imagined a version of you in a similar manner? Like, since you jumped into, like being an environmentalist, you ran into the jungle, want to do something to the conversation. But did anything happen like during that moment where your parents insisted you to do something else, or had they imagined a version of you, like even before you had decided?
Fortunately, not, or at least in the odd moments that when that did occur to some effect, it wasn't as blown out of proportion as some people have to face, like maybe you, for example. I think like all parents, my parents, they want me to score well. I did have to do reasonably well in my exams, and when I didn't do as well, I definitely heard about it. But there wasn't a cookie cutter mold that they wanted me to fit. I think their approach was, here's this new human being trying to find out his place on this planet. Let him take the direction that he finds, and we'll just support him.
So you were supported by your family throughout the journey.
Last year,
That alignment is
I
pretty
think
rare.
I think the places where there was some concern
Mm-hmm.
was within this sphere. What does that mean? So I have this particular interest in snakes. If we're talking about my interest in wildlife specifically, snakes are one group of animals that speak to me. Now, in Indian culture and in cultures across the globe, snakes are particularly feared.
Yes.
And so the idea that I wanted to go and, say, rescue a snake was met with a lot of fear because my parents thought that I wouldn't be able to identify it. And should something untoward happen, I might not be here having this conversation. The reality is that it's a lot more nuanced, and I am proud to say that I'm able to identify these different snakes. But I think that was a space where, obviously, rightly so, my parents were a little concerned. But that lives within this larger sphere of them being supportive, and I am so grateful for it.
Nice. Because most of us, we don't have that psychological freedom of what you want to do. Like we may have a calling, but we end up doing something else in life. But you've, like crossed that path. And I think a lot of people even today, they don't question, they just follow. Like they would have figured out like what their parents want them to be, and they stick to that dream alone. So what you've done, that's really, like appreciable. And I must thank your family here because they've been a support like to you throughout this journey. Nice, Ishan. Ishan, here's something I think a lot about. I'm sure you've seen this too. So many people have something they genuinely love, it links to our previous question, but it never lifts the drawer, right? It only stays a hobby, a someday, or a maybe. So, why do you think some people take that first step while the others are still waiting?
I've spent this last year traveling across the country, speaking to people. That was the venture that I did. And part of my motivation was to answer this very same question. I think Indians in general, from very early on, were conditioned by society, by the conversations we grew up around, to follow a certain script. Like we had mentioned earlier, engineering, so on and so forth. That's one script that we're told to follow, but even otherwise. It's a very conformist society that we live in, and that makes us think that we need to wait for permission to do something else.
Exactly, exactly.
I very luckily had an upbringing and a series of life events which we can talk about, which made me realize that I am not going to wait for anyone's permission. It's my life. I need to make it work for me. And if this is where my soul is channeling me, why would I be my own hindrance? Why don't I just dip into that? Why don't I follow where my natural inclination is and see where that takes me? And so, for example, I grew up and I did a large part of my schooling in a boarding school that was next to a jungle. Now, being the human being that I am, and seeing that the boys' hostels were next to the forest, my natural instinct was to open the hostel door and run into the forest. Now, that was obviously rightly so against school rules. They didn't want students running off into the jungle. God knows what might happen if something happens. Is there someone to help? But, and so that was something I wrestled with. Do I break school rules, or do I just follow what my heart's telling? And finally, I remember one day where I was like, screw it, I want to see what's in there. I want to see what's lurking behind that bush or what's lurking behind that rock. And so I wore my shoes and I just walked in. And I went so deep The thing is, even in the forest, there are some trails. I decided to step off the trail and really go inside the bush. I have maybe scars to show you of the thorns cutting me as I just went into the bush head on.
How old were you, Ishan?
I think I started when I was 14 years old. So I was there when I was 14.
Okay, you were in ninth standard.
Nice, yeah. And the things that I've seen, and I think the self realizations that I've had in that environment have made me the man I am today.
So, if I'm not wrong, it is clarity over confidence. This is where
I'd say conviction.
conviction, nice. So, like in many Indian homes, talents don't die. They're just promoted to time pass. A lot of Indians, like to be honest, and when they turn 40, they look back and say, this was my hobby and I didn't have time for it. I would love to request all my, like younger friends watching this today, if you're young and still have that clarity like Ishan does, please don't let it get promoted to another time pass. Protect it like it's your own and just chase it at any cost. So this is what I would want to tell the younger generation today.
Yeah, I'm sure everyone has that one uncle in their family or in their surrounding, a friend circle, who tells them, mere time mein, which is in to say, when I was younger, I used to do all this. And then you ask them, so then what happened? What did you make of it? Very life happened. And that's something, that's a conversation that every Indian child has had. And it is sad to say that many people grew up to then have that same conversation with their youngsters.
Ishan, with that clarity and conviction, I think that is exactly what it takes, what you did next. You wrote a book of your own life, of your own journey at 21, a life most people your age haven't even seen from a distance. What made you believe that your story was worth sharing? Also, most people say putting yourself forward is arrogance. So, walk me through that. Like, how did that happen?
That's the Indian story, right? Control yourself, behave yourself. Restaurants, close your mouth, which is a phrase I've heard a lot, at least in school. I suppose my story isn't that exceptional. At least I don't want to think it is. I feel like there are a lot more people like me. I suppose I'm just one of the few people who have had the opportunity to share it with the world. The goal of the book was to celebrate the animals that I have been fortunate to share my life with. I guess the idea was planted into my head by my dad, who one day very casually said that it might be a good idea to convert all these nature encounters that I'd had, all sitting in my journals, into a book. And this was just an offhanded comment. But there's something lovely about offhanded comments. These seeds of inspiration have a way of settling into your brain and sprouting at the right time. And so he said this to me, and I sat with it. He said it, and then he left the room, if I remember right. And it sat and stayed with me, and I sort of mulled over this, and I realized that this is not a bad idea because all the stories are there. Up until this point, I was, I think, 19 years old when he said this to me. I had all these lovely experiences of volunteering for all these different organizations. So as a 19-year-old, I could say that I had followed a king cobra into the forest, and I'd spent time alone with the king cobra, much like this, and just watched its movements. I was lucky to say that up until that point, I had gone searching for leopards and setting up, at 18, 19, around then, setting up cameras in the forest to try and study them. This was not research that I pioneered, but I just volunteered for people who were already doing the research. And so I had the experience without having to sort of spearhead the project. And so all these experiences sat in my journal. And as I sort of recounted them to friends and family, I realized that as a 19-year-old, not only do I have these cool experiences, but I have a unique lens that hasn't been shared with the world. Right now, in most fields, acutely so in the environmental space, but even in other spheres of life, you have experts who have 40 years of experience sharing their life story. And I think that's great. I think we need more of that.
Yes.
But we also need a younger perspective, especially a perspective of a generation that is now going to inherit a world that is going through so much turmoil. We need that younger perspective. And so it was this amalgamation of all these different motivations that resulted in me that night opening my laptop and just brain dumping 5,000 words onto a page of just pure inspiration. Whatever this thought that my dad planted in my head, whatever that conjured up in me, found its way onto the page. And then over 2.5 years, that 5,000 words was worked upon, edited, cut, edited again, and then edited 10 more times and then another 200 more times
All right.
into what ultimately got released. I'm working on my second book right now, and I'm sort of reliving some of the trauma of having to edit the same body of text again and again and again. Writing a book is a whole conversation. We can talk about it if you want.
Nice.
And so it took 2.5 years from that day in December 2022, if I remember right, of just working on it again and again and again, often missing out on social opportunities. So you said, what did you have to give up? I had to give up a lot of social opportunities and a lot of socializing in college.
Especially at your age.
Yeah, at my age, that's the whole promise of college, right? Where you go and party and this, that. That was never my inclination to begin with. But even the moderate amount of socializing that I would have had, I got cut down dramatically because instead of spending the evening out eating food at the dhaba at Ashoka University, I had to spend it in conference rooms with locking the door as much as I can. I mean, locking the door as if you can't lock the door, but you put up a fake sign on the door saying, I have an interview, so that no one steals the conference room, because often you'll be working in the conference room and someone else will come and work there, and you can't get into that creative state of mind that a book demands. And so I would write these fake notes, which is a little questionable, but
Very
we
interesting.
got to do what we have to do. Anyway, it involved doing that so that I could spend time in these conference rooms and stay up till maybe 2 or 3 in the night working on the book so that it is something of quality. I feel like if you're trying to create something, which I think more people should do, make sure you put your heart and soul into it. Make sure it is something that will actually benefit the world. And so I'm happy to say that the book is done reasonably well, and I think that's a testament to the hard work that has gone into it.
With my understanding, Ishan, you were not writing to prove something. You were writing to share something, right?
Certainly. It was not, and this is where I feel like the conversation sometimes gets derailed. This was not a celebration of me. Like, look at me, oh, I've done it. I just look, come on, I have no desire to do that. And that is besides the point. I think the goal is to celebrate these animals. I'm very clear about that. They are far more fascinating than I am. And I think even the Instagram channel, which is now expanding to talk about climate tech and all these other different aspects of the environment, the goal is to talk about those things. I just happen to be the vehicle. And I think people sometimes miss the point, or rather, it's incumbent on me to make this clear that this is not a celebration of Ishan as a character. So often at times I'll be in the airport and someone will come up and say, oh, Ishan, I love your work. You're so this, you're so inspiring, you're so. And I mean, of course, it strokes your ego. But what I think is missing from the conversation is these animals are what are inspiring. This landscape is what is inspiring. And so, dude, I mean, I am flattered by all those words, but can we divert the attention back to the animals, or back to the landscape, or back to the incredible innovation that is happening within climate tech, and back to the entrepreneurs who are working to save the environment while building businesses out of it? If that is where the conversation can move, then I think I would have actually had a tangible impact on the world, as opposed to me just showing the world how cool Ishan is, because that's besides the point.
Right. You know what I find really interesting is most people, they wait for permission. They want somebody to say, yes, your story matters. You can write about this. Or maybe your interest. Say, for example, you are interested in the wild, the conservation. So people want somebody to give them a push. But I don't think nobody gives permission here. You have to take it on your own. Like it's a discretionary decision. Like it has to come from within. And this is exactly what you did when you wrote your book. This is my understanding.
Yeah, no, you're right. I think just on that point, some of the people who we admire today had a streak of arrogance, had a streak of self-confidence, maybe overconfidence in themselves, where they believed that they could make a difference. Steve Jobs, for example, has revolutionized tech. Yet, but he's also known as someone who was incredibly abrasive in the way that he spoke. And part of him changing the world that we live in now, even some of this material is probably inspired by the tech that he
Yes.
created. The reason we are living in a world shaped by Apple and so on is because Steve Jobs, back in whatever 19 something, decided that he had it in him to build a company like this, or he had it in him to change his domain. And so I think we need to see more people with that irrational self-belief, because that is actually what ends up moving the needle.
Nice. Ishan, with that, I need a real moment here. 28,000 students. hundreds of institutions across the country, the paperwork, and of course the adults who don't cooperate throughout your journey. I'm tired just saying it, Ishan. But what is the most ridiculous thing that has happened to you, like in this journey when you were building Eco Inspire, and like something that you can laugh about now?
Yeah, there's one that sticks out quite clearly in my mind. So for the listeners, Eco Inspire was this venture that I built on the heels of my book. So I launched the book in early 2025 and it was doing very well, got national attention, and the Instagram channel of my was also growing. And so I got a lot of speaking opportunities. People invited me to all these places across India to speak. And so I realized that there was a demand for someone to speak about the natural world in a way that was invigorating and refreshing. And so I decided to create a venture where I went and did these workshops for institutions, schools, colleges, and so on. And that's the journey that took me to now more than 25 cities and towns. And that's how I got to speak to 28,000 people and share the message of the natural world and share why I think it's worth saving. Anyway, so this was a venture where a lot of these institutions paid to have me,
Mm.
but it was obviously something that I cared about deeply enough to then subsidize for institutions that couldn't afford it. The goal wasn't to only speak to upper market colleges and schools. Like I also want tribal children living in the rural hinterlands of India to hear this message. Arguably, they need to hear it more because they are custodians of the wild. They
Yes.
live next to these animals in a way that you and I can't relate to. These are creatures that are outside their front door. And so I was clear that I wanted people in non-metropolitan places, let's put it that way, to hear this. And so I decided to subsidize a lot of outreach and workshops in these places by myself. So there was this one, I don't want to give away the details because I don't want people to find it, but there was this one place in Kerala. It's not a metropolitan city. In Kerala itself, it's not a metropolis in any way or form, where I decided to do some outreach. And I told this particular school that I'll be coming. Now, in all these other schools, people would do the session, and when I'd come in, they would be almost excessively uh, gracious. I think it was so unnecessary. Like I'm not like Barack Obama coming, Mr. Shan, and so you don't have to roll out this red carpet figuratively. But these people were so nice. They'll ask you for chai. They'll give you this, and in Kerala they'll give you the local snacks and so on.
Mm.
So obviously that strokes your ego on some level, and so I often look at how communications are handled. Even for this podcast, for example, I was very impressed by the way you had handled the whole conversation. Even by the way this whole thing is set up. There was this one school which wasn't very communicative, so I was like, all right, maybe they're not. I'll anyway go there. I'm there for the students, not for the teachers. Effectively, I'm there. I'm primarily there to speak to those who want to listen to me. And so, if these teachers aren't communicating as much as they should, that's fine. I'm there to speak to those who want to listen. And so, I have driven all the way from Bangalore to go and speak at this particular place. And I pull up at this school, and I notice that all the kids are out in the ground. Like, okay, they're playing. That's so nice. When we speak, maybe they'll be pulled back up to the classroom. And I meet the teacher and she looks at me and she says, "Who are you?" I said, "Hello, ma'am. My name is Ishan. We had spoken earlier. I told you that I'll be holding this workshop as part of this venture that I'm building." And then she looks at me, she blinks for a few moments, and then she's like, "Oh, yeah. Yeah, you had told me that you're coming, no?"
This happened.
Yeah, that's what. And then she said, "So you want to do it today?" I said, "Yes, this is the day that we agreed upon, right? Yeah, 2 o'clock after lunch. This is the time that, like, this is what we had agreed upon." Again, and keep in mind, I'm doing this for free for them. Okay.
Exactly.
And she says, you see, the kids have tug of war today. You come some other time.
Oh.
And that's where it really hit me in a way. I was like, do you know what I've been through? I have driven all the way here. I'm doing this for you for free. And in a way, a little bit of the ego inside me wanted to say, I've been called across the country to all these different, embassies and all these other places to speak.
And that's normal.
And look at you. Is this how you treat a guest, especially someone who's doing this for free? And she was like, I can also forget. I didn't say this, okay. I mean, I didn't say it in obviously in a abrasive fashion, but I said, "Excuse me, I've come here to speak." She's like, "Yeah, I forgot. Come back later." And then you're tempted in that moment to argue with that person and sort of prove a point. especially when this is an altruistic move from your end.
Hmm.
But I realized there's no point, and so I drove back. But I often turn back to that moment to ground myself, to realize, to tell myself that, Isha, you're not that special. Maybe some people don't see value in you. That's good. That maybe you need to hear this. And so I often turn back to that moment to ground myself. And now I laugh about it. I think just the expression of that lady in my head is something I'll never forget. Just this idea that, yeah, I mean, I'd gone through this whole hangama to do this for them, and she could say that. It's a moment that I'm happy happened to me.
I think that's the thing about building something, right? Like I think it's not the big vision that breaks you. It is sometimes the smaller ones, the most ridiculous ones, and probably like completely unavoidable things that actually break us up.
Yeah, and it's so nice that this has happened because it has really shown me the spectrum of what's out there. Like I had mentioned earlier, I've gone to schools where people are excessively, appreciative and so on, which I think is uncalled for. I'm not Obama. That's quite, that's as simple as that. But again, and then you have people like this who are just not grateful. And I'm happy that I've had this breadth of experiences so that I can see that the world isn't so black and white, but it's instead a million shades of gray.
But were you okay when you like drove back from there?
Yeah, I drove back. I put on my music and my podcast, and it was fine for me. Yeah.
Brilliant. Ishan, with that, let me take you somewhere quieter for a second. Uh, Something more personal, if you're okay with that. When you were out there alone in the forest, far from everything and everyone, was there ever a moment where something just broke open inside you? Something that nature didn't just teach you, but healed something inside you?
There certainly have been many moments like this. One that sticks out in my mind happened in a rural part of the Himalayas in Uttarakhand. So the Himalayas have been a big part of my childhood. I did a small amount of growing up in Ladakh because my
Awesome.
parents, like I mentioned earlier, were unconventional, right? So they had taken up a project of their own in Ladakh, and they had just done some work there, for which I had to go to Ladakh with them many times a year for almost half a decade. And so the Himalayas very early on have influenced who I am. And so many years later, when I was in uh, at university, I would go to Uttarakhand to trek and just explore those forests. And there was this one moment that I stood at a alpine pass looking out of the valley. A pass connects two valleys. And so when you're sitting at a pass, you can see this vast expanse below you. My generation grows up with a lot of climate anxiety. Every day you hear this news of this flood and so on, and you're told, rightly so, that our environment is in crisis. And that puts a lot of pressure, especially on someone like me. You feel this need to save it. And you also feel this impending sense of doom that maybe by the time you grow up, whenever that happens, your world will be so different and no natural space will be left. That was something that was with me, and it's also now with me. And that was a dread that gnawed at my soul. But when I sat at that pass and I just looked at this vast valley before me, my goodness, I just saw nothing but forest. And it just occurred to me that in that moment, right there, down in that vast jungle, there were animals thinking their own thoughts and doing their own things, all in the shadow of those massive mountains. I think that moved me in a way that not even the best words can articulate. I think that cracked something open in me. I remember crying on that mountainside, just feeling this incredible sense of hope at the fact that nature still existed in vast spaces like the one before me. And I often turn back to that moment. Now that I recount it, I feel like I need to go back and see that side. I feel it'll be good for my soul.
Genuinely powerful, Ishan. I mean,. I can relate to this too. Like I've never walked into the forest and sat alone, but in the darkness, like late at night, uh, like in the darkness when I sit alone, all this business chaos, like they just settle down, and it's just you, it's just your things, and so on. So, I mean, like that experience, that silence, and that understanding, I think that realization, it is inexplicable. I mean, you can't put that into words.
There's something about the absence of noise externally That shows you how noisy your own mind is.
Absolutely.
So sitting on that mountaintop, I think akin to what you just said, where there is so little that you can hear, you realize that there is so much chaos going on inside here,
Right.
much like what you had just
Right.
described. And so I feel like this world will be a better place if more people had such an experience.
Correct. Correct. Ishan, with that, through all that journey that you've gone through, like the wild, the forest, the coral reefs, you've watched them deeply and closely enough. What's quietly disappearing? Uh, Tell me honestly, why should someone living in a busy city life care about conservation?
There are two arguments that I can make. There's a strategic one and a moral one. I'll start with the moral one, please. I think the natural world is our oldest shared context. And right now, we all might be divided into religions and tribes and races or whatever other fiction you want to use to divide. But if you look back at history, all of us were living next to the natural world. That's something that I think on a primeval level, we can all relate to. It's something that we need to tap inside. It's a thread that connects all of us across the globe, whether you're white or black or whatnot. The fact that this natural space, this uniting ancestry that we all have is disappearing, the fact that these creatures and landscapes will not be there for future generations to share and revel in should sound off the alarm bells. I think we have an obligation as someone who participates in this shared human project, and even as people who share in the resources of this planet, to ensure that they, first of all, remain for future generations, and they remain for creatures that might not look like us or might not speak our language. It's funny, the landscapes and the creatures who have done nothing to contribute to this climate problem are the ones who are suffering the most from it. And quite simply, I think the questions we need to ask ourselves is, are we not part of this world? The strategic answer is, if that doesn't convince you, then when your electricity bill goes up because you're using the AC too much, or your water bill goes up because the water is drying out, that will certainly
I
affect.
mean, that's when they understand.
So let's see what argument convinces you.
Okay. So you're not telling the people out there to care about what you're caring, but you're showing them what they already have at stake.
I mean, I think there's this natural perpetual grief that's in the back of people's minds where they look at rivers that aren't the same as what their parents described when they were young, or go back to their native. That's a common Indian phrase, that I'm going to go back to my native, except that native isn't quite what they had heard it to be from their grandparents and their parents. And this idea that animals used to live so close by but now are slowly receding. Let's take somewhere closer to us. Let's take Mysore. Okay. Mysore has the famed Chamundi Hills, and a space that is wild and is known to host many animals. And yet now I know a lot of people who are researching uh, within that space, and they're seeing a steady decline of animals because Mysore as a city has ambition as it's trying to grow. And as a result, it's cannibalizing a lot of the natural spaces around it.
Right.
And the question we need to ask ourselves is, what answer are we going to give to future generations when they asked us what we did during these times? Because let us be perfectly clear, this is not an inevitability. This is a conscious choice that people in power are making. And the question is, are we going to ask for a world that is equitable to all, especially creatures that don't look like us, or are we going to sit back and watch these spaces get cannibalized? That's the question we need to answer.
But there's a cliche, like a lot of people, like when I talk to them about conservation, what I hear is it's the forest, I mean, like officials' headache, it is the forest department's headache, it is the government's headache. But I don't think it is their headache alone. It is everybody's problem, right? As you rightly mentioned, everybody has their own role, right from like discarding your like household trash into roadsides, and like taking these alcohol bottles and throwing them off in the forests. This has been a norm nowadays. Like wherever, I mean, like to whichever forest you visit, you will see I mean, like in bits and pieces in some parts of the forest, the alcohol bottles, the cigarette bits, all of it. I mean, like it's become a cliche. Like people are no more worried about like conservation. So I think what you are doing right now, I wanted to reach, like big in number, like maybe in the next 3-4 years, probably everybody will get to know and will feel the pain that you're feeling today. I want that to happen very soon.
I think it will.
It will and it should. Ishan, do you watch movies?
I am honest enough to say that I am a little more movie illiterate than I'd like to be. So I ask my friends for suggestions. I'm happy to hear some if you have.
Okay, I believe that stories shape the world, right? Hollywood, it gave us Jaws, Jaws the movie.
Steven Spielberg, right?
Yes, and then
I think it was Steven Spielberg, by the way. I'm not sure. I think it was Spielberg.
I mean, I
Yeah.
think so.
There's one of those same directors, yeah.
Correct. So first it gave us Jaws,
Yeah.
and then it gave us Anaconda, and then every shark documentary that starts with an attack, right? Uh, an entire generation has grew up afraid of these animals, like even before they saw one in real. Ishan, that fear has become belief, and that belief has become like how they treat. Like the moment I see a young girl or a boy see a shark, I mean, like even if it is in the TV, I mean, like on the TV, like they're afraid of it because they don't know whether that animal, like hunts them or not. But by watching the movies, they have that feeling that I have to be afraid of these animals, be it snakes, be it shark, or like any, like movie that comes in Hollywood. How do you actually change the story that people have believed for decades? And what does that teach us about the values shaping the world today?
I think this speaks to the incredible and terrifying power of media.
Hmm.
The fact that this one movie has set off this chain of events that have resulted in many media pieces going out, painting these creatures as vicious beasts. The truth is, these animals are always what they have been, creatures that have evolved in the sea, not to attack people. Snake, for example, do you think a cobra can eat me?
No.
But realistically, I'd love to see a cobra that could. That would be the discovery of a century. That doesn't exist. But movies like this, okay, Anaconda speaks to a larger constrictor. It's not a cobra, but the larger point I'm trying to make is these media pieces have portrayed them as vicious beasts. But the truth is, these are creatures trying to live their lives, and the actual figures of, say, shark attacks on human beings are far outstripped by trivial things like being struck by lightning, or I've heard in some cases, falling out of your bed. There are more people who die of such causes. So just to put things into perspective, the way we reverse it, to answer your question, is by harnessing that same power that is caused in the first place. Right? Let's remember that media, at its fundamental core, is a neutral tool, and it's incumbent on the people wielding that power to use it judiciously and thoughtfully.
Right.
These people, perhaps unintentionally so, or maybe intendedly so, have used these creatures and the myth and the legend around them and crafted that legend thereby to get money. But we are right now seeing an influx of media, of which I am a small contributor, where we give these creatures the rightful portrayal that they deserve. Not even the rightful, but just an accurate, factual portrayal that they deserve, so that people can go and see that, oh, maybe they're just other creatures just like me, trying to figure out this game that we call life. I think it's important to realize that progress is not a straight line, but it zigs and zags. And so the bet that I am making and all these communicators are making is that the seeds that we sow now, like what I've done through Eco Inspire and so on, will yield fruit maybe 10 or 15 years down the line, where
Yes.
these people come out to the national stage and actually have an impact in shaping policy and shaping public opinion. Let's hope that's the case.
Completely agree. I strongly advocate, for the power of storytelling. If it can create fear, it can absolutely create respect. I think that, like it's time that shifted, right? Like you mentioned, the power lies with the media. So they have to do something for the next generations coming forward. They should understand that these animals are not, like something to be scared of. So we need them. We need them to be alive for the next few centuries.
So just along those lines, let me be clear. It's very easy for us to sit on this table and say that the media should do this. I really think the media should do this. But what is actually going to make a difference is people who hear this and actually go and make said media. It's I cannot ask a news channel to. I cannot point my fingers at a news channel and say, "Hey, you should be doing this." Who will they? Why will they listen to me? But I can go and start my own news channel. I can build this. Now we're at a time where it's easy to build anything, and therefore people should, especially within media. And so I would like people to see that we are in this golden opportunity where it's never been easier to create media of your own and try and use it to speak for the cause of creatures and that can't speak for themselves.
Right.
I am a little critical of activism that only points fingers and complains because there's a limit to how much complaining you can do. At some point, you need to take up the baton and run the race yourself. You need to sort of do something on your own. You need to stop waiting for permission and create something of your own. And it's never been easier to create. So if any of what I've said has moved you, I will encourage you to take that emotion and channel it into building something that will move needles. I want to see results on the ground. I don't want to see people agreeing with me and then forgetting about it the next day. I want to see people take what I say and channel that into building something that will help make this world a better place. That's what I would like to say.
Brilliant, Ishan. Brilliant. I want most of my listeners listening to this to understand the care that Ishan has for nature, and it's everyone's responsibility, like you rightly mentioned out. Ishan, now I want to ask you about who you've become through all of this. So, like, would you mind saying like one value from your upbringing that you've held on to, and one that you have let go of? What are they?
I think one value that I've held on to is saying yes to that thing that you feel so deeply in your soul that you might not be able to articulate. Is that a label for it? Maybe someone can say it in the comments. But I feel like instead of fighting what your soul is telling you, leaning into it is something that I stand by. That's a value that I've taken and a value that I've let slip into the past is this idea that I need to wait for permission. Also, I've also let this nihilism, this idea that, oh, the world is going to the dogs and there's nothing we can do. I've let that slip into the past because the truth is there are a lot of people working on the ground. They just don't get the media attention that they deserve because maybe it's not as clickbaity. But the goal is now not to complain that it's not clickbaity, but to make it clickbaity. You get what I mean, right?
Yes.
There's a lot of good work happening on the ground, and that gives me incredible hope.
Nice. That's the real sign of growth, isn't it? Like if I have to ask the same question to myself, one thing that I have held on to is honesty. Like it was drilled into me long before I could understand what it. I mean, like why it mattered. And one thing I consciously let go of was that I the idea was like doing good and doing well, where uh, I mean, like they can't exist. So I had this thought that like I believed that business and ethics cannot go hand in hand. And later, consciously, I put it down. Like when I started building my companies, I started like to drop that idea of my brains consciously. So yeah, uh, Ishan, the world right now is obsessed with fast and shortcuts. You've seen it around you: fast money, fast fame, fast results. But what you're building, the conservation, it just doesn't happen overnight, right? A forest doesn't grow overnight, and like the like what you're doing right now, like it takes decades, like to see the results. Have you ever watched someone else winning faster, louder, easier, and thought to yourself, "Am I doing this right, or am I in the right path?"
Like jealous.
Maybe.
I think that is the tune of my generation. Like growing up on social media, there's always someone who is doing 10 times the things that you're doing. I think this is where a lot of the conversation falls into binaries where people say, oh, it's sad that people are comparing themselves so much. It's happened to me. I've compared myself to people who are my age or maybe younger. Like, there are these stories of people who are changing the world from when they're inside the womb only, right? Uh, Those are obviously extremes. And I think there's a limit to how much you should let jealousy infect your brain and your thinking. But I also feel like it's not something that you should completely throw under the carpet. I am happy to, first of all, see that there are people doing such great work at such young
Yes.
stages of their life. First of all, I think we should realize that I'm nowhere in that picture, and me comparing actually inserts myself into the picture. Do you get what I mean?
Yeah.
This isn't about you. This is about that person having done some incredible work at their age. Stop comparing yourself. In a way, this is not about you. Stop making this about you. This is about their work and them doing great things. And even if you are comparing, because maybe perhaps it's a natural human instinct, I would like people to do it in a way that invigorates them. That's at least what I try to do. I'm so happy to see that someone at 16 has gone and championed a climate movement. Or climate is just one space. Let's just say uh, someone's fighting for racial equality or whatever cause you want to take. The fact that they're doing such great work at their age should inspire you to do great work at your age, right?
I respect it. Yes.
There's this lovely phrase, the best time to have started doing whatever it is you want to do was 10 years ago. The second best time is now. Second best is pretty good if you ask me.
Yes, absolutely. This has passed my thoughts too. Like, I see a lot of people winning around me, like faster, louder, and easier. And then I remind, like I say to myself, Ajay, what you are doing needs discipline, not luck. What you are doing needs perseverance, like not that luck again. And what you are doing needs dedication, like it needs sacrifice that doesn't show up on Instagram. And then it keeps me going from there.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
what you're doing too, like it has all this four, like foundations. Like what you're building needs discipline, and of course, like it takes a lot of sacrifice and the perseverance that you already have. So yeah, I mean, total respects.
thank you. I think what you said also is another argument that Instagram and social media blows it out of proportion. But that doesn't take away from the main point that the fact that people are out there doing good work isn't in any way or form related to you. So stop making it about yourself. And secondly,
It's much
it's actually an inspiring thing to see young people doing good
doing
things.
good.
It shows that people are not asking for permission anymore, and that is where the world needs to go.
Right, right. Very well put. Ishan, you have sat across thousands of students, like I earlier mentioned, not just students, but parents, teachers. What is one thing that people feel about the environment that they never actually say it out loud?
You mean like a misconception or
Yes.
a misconception? I think there is this divide in people's minds where they say humans live here and nature is out there. The truth is, there is nature out in the park that I had to cross to come to this venue. There is nature out in the tree that is growing outside this building. There's nature in the campus that you live and study in. There are birds, for example, that come here all the way from Siberia. Siberia. It's a place I've never been. I will go there at some point. There are birds which are perhaps as big as this glass that have made their way to where we are right now sitting, all the way from Siberia, which shows that nature is a lot closer to us than we might imagine. And that notion that it's only what is out there is something that we need to break. And that's what I'm trying to do, partly through what I put out there.
Nice. So, like, we all know something's wrong, but saying it out loud means admitting that we are a part of it. So, I think most of these people, they don't, like, show up, I mean, or like show it out loud.
That's good. What you said was good. I think
It's easier to blame the government, like,
the government, of course, gets a lot of blame, which
anyone but the mirror.
in many ways obfuscates you of the blame.
Hmm.
That's a good line. I want to steal that one.
I think each of us are accountable for this, like for the conservation, for the nature.
Each of us are accountable. And I think that's where I want to add a caveat because that conversation often turns into you should, no, I'm good. Thank you. I think each of us are accountable. And that conversation should be caveated because that often turns into guilting people to saying, oh, look at you, you're using this air conditioner, or look at you, you're doing whatever uh, climate affecting behavior. But instead, when we say each of us is accountable, it should translate into us, therefore, saying that each of us has the ability to shape this conversation. Let us not accept the future as it has been presented to us, right? Each of us has a stake in it, and therefore, each of us has an ability to shape the conversation. And that is where I want people to speak up and actually put their values, so to speak, out there.
Rightly said. Rightly said. That takes a lot of maturity to put this across. Ishan, I think this one, a lot of people in the room and listening will feel deeply. There's a common Indian phrase. I mean, like it's a classic Indian phrase, if I can, like say it out. What people think of is in Kannada we say "Jana ene ಹೇಳ್ತಾರೆ." In Hindi translation, "Lok like kya kahenge if you do this." Uh, it follows us everywhere, like it follows us into our careers, into our relationships, into the quiet moments in our homes. How do you make a decision that's truly yours when everybody seems to have an opinion?
I'm going to give you my polished answer and then I'm going to give you my Indian answer.
Yes, please.
Right? The polished answer is the fact that these people's voices are loudest when you are thinking about making the decision to try and do something unorthodox.
Okay.
And they are the quietest when you're actually doing it.
Correct.
The Indian answer is, Abhay, what will they think, bro? What will they do? Well, like, do they have any effect on your life? Just shut up and close your ears and do the work. That's the Indian way of saying it, which I think in some ways is what people should actually hear. Like quit whining. Okay, people will say what they want to say. Like, are you gonna let them dictate your life? No, right? So shut up and work. It's a little crass way of putting it. It's not as polished as
No, but
I think anything that I've said on this table. But I think maybe sometimes a slap on the back is required, and that comes through by speaking as a typical Indian.
no, but this is very
Not a typical Indian. I think that's a stereotype. Sorry, I'm just
yeah. No, that is a stereotype.
but I think sometimes you need to hear things put in a not so nice way, and that's one way of putting it.
I mean, like that differentiates you from a lot of people out there because I also, I mean, like even I was one of those people who cared a lot about what people said. That noise in the background, it always popped out. Like whenever I wanted to take a decision, that noise was always there in the background. And then I reminded myself, I mean, like I realized something, the people's opinions are loudest in the beginning. When you take the first step, they go quiet.
Or maybe they just grow loud in appreciation also. That's
Correct.
That's
No,
another thing.
they go quiet. And then what follows is they go quiet because now they're just watching. They might be watching, they might be admiring you, or maybe, like they're probably jealous of what you're doing. But it doesn't, like matter anymore to me. So this is what even I want to tell my audience. A lot of people, they care, like about what people say, especially the youngsters. I mean, me back then when I was of your age, I used to care a lot. Oh, what he might think of me or what she might think of me. But now it doesn't matter to me anymore.
There's a particular moment in my life that I can trace to
Hmm.
me realizing this emotion. I was in boarding school, and that day at breakfast, I was late because there was a snake that I needed to see. So obviously, I didn't go for breakfast directly. I went to watch the snake, and once it slithered off, then I went. I remember the snake also. It was a banded racer, one of the few times I'd seen that snake. Anyways, so I was late to breakfast, and the only table that was there in boarding school, for some reason, we had to sit with our class only. I don't know why. And so there was only this one table left. Everyone else had gone to assembly. And so I had to quickly eat. So I got whatever dosa was there and I went to that table. And I didn't want to sit alone, but because of what people might think, look at this fellow sitting alone. Uh, and so I went to sit at this table, and all those people, mostly girls at that table, and I pull their leg now. They probably don't even remember doing this. They're like, Ishan, no, why do, like, because table manners dictate that if a new person comes and sits, you sit with them for the entire duration of their meal, which means them getting late or them having to spend more time than they had initially planned. And I think that initial pang of rejection, and all these people, especially girls, these girls don't want to sit next to me, hurt me so deeply in that moment. I remember, I remember what I think this was. I think I was in 10th standard or 9th standard or one of them. So I was even like I was new to the school also, and then this is the reaction you get. I remember really piercing me in my heart. It was one of the most hurtful things that had happened to me. And in that moment, I'm like, fine. And I maybe even sweat. And I went and I sat on a different table. Some of them came, they're like, sorry, Ishan. But I'm like, it's like, you go. Okay. And I'll eat whatever, this cold dosa by myself. But I think that moment I turn to a lot. Every time I ever get these thoughts creeping in of what will people think, to hell with what people think. This is your life. And I think having that courage to sit alone at a table, which is such a trivial thing now, come to think of it. But back then it was the whole world of what do people think? You're sitting alone, are you a loner or whatever it is. But having the courage to do it in that moment has given me the courage to do a little more daring things that have happened later after that incident. Yeah. I touched that meme down.
So it doesn't affect you anymore.
No, not at all. Oh, no, no, not at all now, not now. But back then, it was a moment, it was big. So to put into context, that was, back then it was a huge thing. Now, obviously, I have a thicker skin, but back then it was something that I needed to go through.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Ishan, let's talk about the reality of building something.
Yeah.
You're an author, you're a speaker, you're running Eco Inspire, you're also showing up online, all at 23. How do you keep your head clear when everything else is pulling you from all the directions?
Oh, it's noisy inside here.
Yes.
I don't want,
I want to understand it.
no, I don't want the audience to labor under the delusion that I have it sorted out. I don't. I've only recently, as of a few months ago, dedicatedly gotten myself to use Google Calendar as something. So, for example, I slotted this in Google Calendar because that's the only organized way to run your life. But I think moving beyond productivity tips and so on, me prescribing advice for myself primarily, I would say having this conviction of doing one thing at one time and just focusing on that. So, example, on this conversation, like we're having this conversation, I don't want to be thinking about the interview that I have to hold for someone tomorrow. I'm in, or the book that I need to write, that I need to give the manuscript for at the end of this month, or the innovation challenge that my master's college has given me. There are so many things on my mind, but the point is, try and immerse yourself in the one thing that you're doing and do it well. So hopefully, I've done this conversation some justice.
Yeah, it makes sense because it gives you the freedom to be present. This is what you're trying to put across, right?
More than freedom, I think you owe it to whatever task you're doing to do it well, and I try to fulfill that.
Nice. Ishan, Eco Inspire. Again, I'm going back to those numbers 28,000 students, 100 institutions. That's not just a conservation initiative, right? I see someone who has built a system and kept it alive throughout. Do you see yourself as an entrepreneur? Or did you only realize later that this is what you're doing?
I came to that word quite late in my life, entrepreneur. And I say late, I know I recognize 23 is still very early. But an entrepreneurial spirit is what has guided me through much of what I've done on my time on this planet, in my time on this planet. I've been building things for as long as I can remember, whether it was building small circuits or building a aeroplane launcher when I was younger. Yes, that's something that I built. I used to like engineering. Oh, not in the typical Indian fashion, but just the genuine love for the craft of buildings. When was this? This is when I was very small. When I was like, I think, I was maybe in like 6th, 7th grade, or just building things that will help me. For example, Big Bang Theory, which is not a show I endorse in any way, but uh, has this one scene of one of the main characters folding a T-shirt using this contraption. It's basically this series of plates that you can uh, tie together with hinges that will allow you to fold clothes in an efficient manner, as opposed to you doing it yourself. I'll actually give it to you, given that you run a store. I'll send you the link.
Right, please.
And so I am not someone, at least I wasn't back then, who was very organized. And so I developed this, I saw what Big Bang Theory was showing me, and I developed that machine for myself. But it's a little hard to describe. Maybe I'll send you the video and you can press it in place for people to understand what I mean. But the point is, I've been building things. And so even the book I see as a product that I had deliberately fashioned over 2.5 years and worked on, so that it's a product that actually, uh, that is actually something that the audience will value. So entrepreneurship and solving for problems has been the spirit that has guided me throughout my life. The term only came into my life once I started studying entrepreneurship when I was at university at Ashoka. And now I'm going to do a master's degree in business because that's the real force that dictates how this world is going to go. And that's what I want to partake in.
Right.
So, entrepreneurship, even EcoInspire was a venture that I had built that was underscored by entrepreneurial concepts. It's one thing to say that, oh, I'll go and speak in other places. It's another thing to build what is effectively like a CRM where you can manage all the different schools that you're talking to and manage the communications and manage which stage each of the communications is at so that you can maximize your outreach. You cannot reach 28,000 people and 100 institutions by simply having these people as contacts in your phone. You need a spreadsheet to manage this. You need to tag it and index it properly. And so all of that demands a certain entrepreneurial mindset. So that's
So I think
that's my argument for me being an entrepreneur.
so. I think you claim the identity consciously, like down the line when you started solving problems.
I mean, I embraced the
That's
term
when
later,
it's
but
brought up.
I embraced the term later, but I took to the spirit very early on.
Very early when you were how old, if I may ask?
When was the first thing that I built? I have to dig into my memory. I think I'll have to ask my mom. She'll probably tell you. Yeah.
Nice. Ishan, at this stage, I have to bring this up because this isn't small. Shashi Tharoor,
Hmm.
radio book. He called it blazingly honest. A sitting member of parliament, Ishan, said it about your work. What was that moment actually like for you?
Look, him specifically, he is a very gracious human being.
I look up on.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So someone of that stature, one would assume that they would carry themselves with a certain ego and so on. That's not what I found. He was such a gentleman. There was this lovely moment where I entered his office and I was all nervous and fidgeting with my watch and whatnot. And I was in line actually. There were a bunch of people who wanted to meet him. He's an MP and so on, so he's accountable to the constituents. And so I was technically posing as a constituent to go and meet him in his office, and I sort of glimpsed at him through the window. I was like, oh, to the gap in the door. I'm like, okay, this is happening. And finally, when we sat down,
Mm-hmm.
the first few seconds I was tense. Uh, and I thought I had to prove myself as someone worthy of his time. But 5 minutes in, and I felt my shoulders just relax because he carried himself without any airs and without the ego that you might expect in someone of his stature. He was much like this, actually. It was perhaps exactly like this. He had a desk much like this, and he was talking to me and asking me about my work, and I told him about the book, and I gave him the manuscript just as something that he could read, and I printed it out for him to read. And for a painful 5 minutes, he said nothing. He just looked at it. Now, as with someone whose time is in such high demand, even getting 5 minutes uninterrupted is a great gift. This man gave me around 20 minutes of uninterrupted time, of which 5 minutes was spent just looking at the manuscript. So everyone, as his secretary, is there with his hands like this, and all the other people involved in his work were around me just looking. And also because this was in Trivandrum, so everyone speaks Malayalam there, in Kerala in general. And so looking at this person speaking English, because obviously I was not going to talk to him in Malayalam. I can't speak that language all that well. And so he just looked at it, but that showed me that this man was genuinely curious in the work that I had done. And so he was poring over each word, and then he looked at the illustrations and he said, "This is what you drew?" I said, "Very nice." And then he told me about a story about that animal. Then he looked at this photograph and he said, "Oh, I really like this photograph." And so he spent that time, and then the conversation continued. His praise, and I think by extension, just the general uproar of appreciation that my work has gotten, especially over this last year, has of course been extremely gratifying. When you work on something for 2.5 years, to see that kind of payoff, I think it validates the fact that hard work matters.
Yes.
It also comes with a certain degree of responsibility. It shows you that, okay, now you've made an entry onto this larger stage. And with that, you have a certain responsibility to use the public eye that you now have consciously and with a certain degree of respect. Whether that means being being appreciative of the people that helped you get there. I'm not saying that it's because of Shashi Tharoor that I got there, but he certainly gave me an immense boost of confidence, because if someone of that stature can see value in you and your work, it makes you realize that maybe you're meant for bigger things. But it's not only him. I just want to make it clear. It's even the fact that this one teacher in a rural corner of Madhya Pradesh teaching in a tribal school, it was him also telling me that, Ishan, I think you're really onto something, in Hindi, because English wasn't his first language. That was equally gratifying, because it shows that this other human being, someone with a completely different life and life circumstance, could see value in me. I think that is not something I take lightly.
You were 21 back then, right? If I'm not wrong.
With
you met
Shashi Dr. Tharoor, yeah, I was, I think, 20 or 21. I met him.
Soon after your book.
No. It was before the book, right? Because he endorsed the book.
Okay.
It was 21.
I think, yeah. So validation from the right person at the right time. I think that says it all.
I've been fortunate to meet a lot of these leaders now, leaders at the state level, national level, like him, and even local leaders. And it's nice to have heard these nice things from all these people. Yeah.
Very nice, Isha. With that, I believe the world suddenly started paying attention, right?
It certainly took off from there. Yeah.
Correct. And social media is where a lot of that recognition lives now. It has given you 60,000 plus followers to be,
Yeah.
right? But it also asks you to perform. Have you ever caught yourself being a version of Ishan that looks great online, but then feel real? And what did you do when you caught it?
I find myself with that emotion every day. Speaking to what I'd said earlier, people look at the social media work, and I mean the book, they read the book and so on. And when you read a book, especially a biographical material, you develop this parasocial relationship, even with YouTubers or Instagrammers or whatever you want to call them. By seeing someone's content repeatedly over a period of time, you feel like you know that person. On some level, you do know that person. And so you have a lot of occasions where people come up to you and say, so fascinated by your work, and they're so genuinely appreciative of you as a human being. It makes you feel like, I think you have got this blown out of proportion. I'm just another humble human being. I have this quirky interest, and it makes you a little conscious. I think the platform itself, of course, asks you to be a certain way, but I suppose I'm very clear that the content that goes out has to serve me, and I'm not serving an algorithm. I am creating content that I'm interested in, and this all has to serve me at the end of the day. It's not, if I'm not here to perform.
Hmm.
And I'm just very clear about that, because it's, if I wanted to be a performer, I'd go into acting, right? I might be even reasonably good at it.
You had a clear vision of
Yeah, so
responsibilities.
it's not about performing for the algorithm. It's just about me sharing what I want to share.
The fact that you have stayed conscious of it, I think that's real discipline, Ishan. That's real discipline. Ishan, what you're building is not easy. The results, as you know, it's slow. Funding is definitely hard, and most people around you, they don't feel the urgency that you're feeling. Right? How do you keep going in spite of all this? What pushes you to keep going?
This is internal conviction that I'm here to make a difference and I'm here to build something.
Hmm.
Externally, I feel like I understand where that emotion comes from, and which is why I think it is the intersection of business and climate where this world will truly transform. That's why I want to work in that space. It is the only thing that's going to move the needle. People don't respond that much to politics, to this, to that. Markets is what moves the world. And so to work at the intersection of climate tech and innovation in the climate space, that is what is genuinely going to transform the world. That's why I'm throwing my hat into that rim.
Ishan, what really like took me off, like for surprises. Most people, they quit when they realize the results don't, like show up soon. Right? There's a lot of people who start something and they quit, like eventually when the results don't show up. Honestly, I should admit what you're doing is not easy, Ishan. It is not easy. It is not, like applauded often. You're building for a generation that hasn't even arrived yet. So my best wishes with you.
There's a pleasure in doing hard things.
Hmm.
That's what I would say to people who.
That takes a different kind of courage, right?
Perhaps so.
At 23, that takes.
Maybe you're right. I haven't thought about it that way. I just suppose I find the challenge invigorating. The reason I want to work in this intersection that I mentioned earlier of climate and business is because it is a pressing challenge. And I feel like history is calling upon us, history that is yet to be written is calling upon us to rise to the occasion.
Respect, Ishan. Respect. Ishan, earlier you mentioned about heading into a business school, maybe in 3 months, right? And I find that genuinely interesting. Why? Because you have already built something real, correct? So, what does someone like you go there looking for?
I think I need at this stage a fluency in the business world so that I can make this marriage work, this marriage of the environmental work as a business world. The truth is, this is a space that is only going to grow. And this is the space that is going to genuinely make those transformative changes that our world needs to see in order to make do on our promise that we can survive this climate crisis. And that means innovating in that space. And that means diverting a lot of talent. Not that I'm saying that I'm talent, but I am part of a larger talent pool that we need to bring into this space. So going to business school, especially the kind of business school that I've chosen, it's called the Tata College of Business. It's a entrepreneurship and tech degree married into one, where you have to build a business that is understood by technology in whatever space that you want to in all these different countries. The idea is that by gaining those skills, by training those muscles, you will have the skill set that you can then use to build whatever businesses that you want to build to then go and change the world. I've been business oriented for as long as I can remember, speaking to that entrepreneurship mindset earlier. Even the book, for example, it's one thing to write a kick ass book, which is what I did. It's another thing to make it a bestseller. Books don't become a bestseller, especially for a debut author overnight. You need to go out and build the audience. So, part of the reason I built the Instagram audience was so that when the book was ready, I had an audience to market to. I find it fascinating that people are surprised to see this side of me. It's very sharky business side, but that is genuinely how my mind thinks. And so, even as I go back on the way here, as I go back, when I sleep, when I wake up, the only thing that's going in my mind is how can I work on getting my message out there and what are the business levers that I can pull, whether it's on social media or in terms of larger market trends that we can tap into to innovate. So, for example, I was recently just brainstorming with Claude on how we could recycle the RO water. Do you have an RO purifier at home? Yeah. So when you take a glass of water, there's a lot of wastewater that goes out, right? That's the water that it keeps taken out. The salts are out of this membrane. That's how the RO purifier works. And it looks like such a terrible waste of water, right? And so I was trying to think about how we could save that water. Maybe if we could design buildings in such a way that all these RO purifiers have this duct connecting to a water tank that they can use to clean the basement or other tasks that don't require fresh water that we're now diverting to it. That's one way. So we need to see more innovation in that space and in climate tech in general. And that's why I'm joining Business School.
Honestly, this path, I find it most interesting. I don't think you're going there for knowledge. More than knowledge, I think you're going there for network, for the structure,
For both.
both.
I
Maybe the language to explain to the outside world all of what you're already building.
all of it. Even just knowledge of markets. So the reason I'm happy to go to China is because China is right now leading the race. And there's so much innovation happening in all these different places in China within the climate tech space. So I'm happy to immerse myself in that ecosystem.
That's a completely different journey, from myself and from my team. I wish you all the very best at that. Ishan, before we close, I want to ask you this, and I want the real answer. There's a 17-year-old listening to this right now. Small town, no connections, no support at all. Just a pull towards something they cannot fully explain. What do you actually say to them in real sense?
Borrowing from everything that we have said in this conversation,
Yes.
don't wait for permission. Start building. If you don't know what to build, open Claude telling your idea, hear its thoughts, and then start building the next minute. The future is only going to reward those people who take action. There are plenty of talkers, people who actually do the work. They're going to see the needle move in their favor.
Loved it, loved it. So, to my viewers, what Ishan said, don't wait for permission, right? So, you don't need connections, you don't need a push, you don't need permission. So, what you genuinely love, chase behind it.
You need to start, full stop.
You need to start, period. Correct. So, Ishan, 10 years from now, we sit back here and do this again. What does the world look like if the work you are doing actually wins? And honestly, who do you want to have become by then?
The world will move to a place where sustainability, which is a buzzword, or just environmentally conscious and environmentally inclined business will become more than just a good to have, which is what people believe it's now, into a mandate of the people and a mandate of governments. We're already seeing the trend of people making regulations to make things more environmentally compliant. And thus, we will see a lot more innovation within this space. And among that list of names, mine will be somewhere in the middle, hopefully. As for the kind of person that I would be, I hope to be one of those names on the list. I'll leave it at that.
Ishan, that's a good place to land, honestly, because everyone can answer what they want to become, but only few, like Ishan, can answer who they want to become while they're still building it. Ishan, with that last question, and I mean it, it's the most important one for this show. And one line, what does the word value actually mean to you?
To borrow the words from a novel called How Do You Live? It's a Japanese classic. It's those things that you feel most deeply from the bottom of your heart that will never deceive you in the slightest.
That line is all about the show is. So, Ishan, I started this conversation thinking I'll be interviewing an author. But sitting here with you, I realize you're not just writing about the wild, you're trying to wake something up in people. That awareness, that connection, and I think you're already doing it. So, this show is called Built on Values, and everything you've built, the book, Eco Inspired, the way you speak about nature, it all comes from one value that the world is worth fighting for. Thank you for bringing that into this room today, Ishan. And thank you for being episode of Built on Values. And for everyone listening, please go find Ishan at ishan.shanavas on Instagram. The book is The Light of Wilder Things. It's on Amazon and the link is in the description. If you have kids, please buy it. If you were ever a kid who loved the outdoors and forgot, please buy it for yourself. This was Built on Values. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.